One of the reasons why people who signed up to be here today and are not here right now is because they did not want to face this. Unconsciously, when they saw this on the agenda, said, I cannot face that. So congratulations, first of all, for having the courage to be here in the first place and be willing to go through what it is that we're going to show you. So I'm going to tell you this story. It started 30 years ago. It's a very personal story, and I've already sat down with my children and told them to be prepared for what they're about to hear, and I've already prepared you. Before I get into the story, you have to know that there's this wall in Washington, D.C. It's a monument to the Vietnam veterans from the United States. Has anybody ever been there? Okay, a lot of people have been there. It's very emotional when you see it, right? That wall was built in the early 1980s, and at the time they built it, there were slightly over 57,000 names on that wall. Right now, there are over 58,000 names on that wall, and every Memorial Day, there are more names added, and there's a process that people go through to designate somebody for possible recognition to be on the wall. But the basic guidelines is that you have to have some sort of physical or mental injury while in Vietnam in a combat zone. And if you can prove that, whether you were killed in Vietnam or died later on, you qualify to have your name to be put on that wall and to be recognized. Now, I know there were some veterans in here. Sean, you're a Ranger, right? Army Ranger. I know there were some others as well. So I think you'll really get the full impact of what we're about to do. So this story starts 30 years ago. I was a junior in college at Trinity College in Hartford, Connecticut, same school that my son went to, Jared. And I had a part-time job in an automotive parts warehouse. And I'd go there in the mornings, I'd ride my bike there, and I would work. And then I'd go back to school, and I'd go to classes and do all kinds of things. And the people who owned this business were very nice people. They basically said to me, whenever you want to come and work, come on and work. Do your thing. We'd love to have you. And there were a few other people working under the same conditions. And there was a gentleman there. His name was James. And James wasn't really my supervisor, but he kind of knew his way around the warehouse. And when I showed up, he would tell me what to do, what we were assigned to do that day. And primarily, my job was to unload brake shoes off of trucks and put them on shelves and inventory them. Didn't take a lot to do that, but James would tell me what to do, and I would do it. We had a very unique relationship. I don't know if any of you know what race relations were like in the late 1970s in Hartford, Connecticut, but they weren't that good, were they? I mean, Jared lived in Hartford until a few years ago, and I don't think race relations are still that good today. So James was a black man, about 12 years older than me, and I would show up, and I would just do whatever he told me to do, and he was really intrigued by that. You know, what's this kid doing coming from this little preppy school, and he comes in here, and he actually talks to me. I mean, little did he know that I went to an inner city high school, and at least 30 or 40% of my friends were Hispanic, were black. I came from a real multicultural area in the city. No big deal to me. Never even entered my mind, but he was really intrigued by this. So we would talk, and over time, we really got to know each other more than just saying hello and that kind of thing. But he would ask me a lot of questions, primarily about going to school. He'd ask me a lot of questions about playing sports and those kind of things. And over time, we became not really good friends, but we became acquaintances. One interesting thing about him was that about every hour and 15 or every hour and 20 minutes or so, he would literally disappear. Nobody would know where he was, where he went, what he was doing, but he would just go. And then he'd reappear, and he'd be fine. And the second interesting thing about him was that he always seemed to be in pain. Always was in some sort of physical or mental pain. I don't think I ever saw him without seeing that in him. But he was a really hard worker, and he knew what he was doing, and I enjoyed working with him. I didn't really know much about him except for a couple of things. I knew that he was a Vietnam veteran because although he never talked about it, occasionally he would say something like, when I was in Nam, right? Some of you probably have heard that statement before, right, from veterans? When I was in Nam, and then he would finish the sentence. I knew that he lived in the housing projects in Hartford, Connecticut, and that's pretty much all I knew. So after about 2 or 3 months of working there, James said to me, I went to work one day, and instead of going in the morning, I went in the afternoon because of my schedule. And we finished up around 4 o'clock, and James said to me, could I talk to you for a little while? Let's go out to the loading dock. I said, sure. So we go out there, we sit on the loading dock, and we're making some small talk, and all of a sudden James pulls a joint out of his pocket. So immediately I knew where James had been disappearing, right? Every hour, hour and 15 minutes. But I want to put this in perspective for you. At that part of my life, at that age, I had no tolerance for drugs, for people who use drugs, for people who sold drugs, in any way, shape, or form. I had seen my best friend go down the path, initially with drinking, to eventually to the point became a crack cocaine addict and gave up the right to be a professional golfer. I'd already seen part of that in my life. I had seen people who were very close to me in my immediate family become dependent on prescription drugs, people who were compulsive gamblers, and people who literally drank themselves to death. Now, I have nothing against drinking. However, at that point in my life, I had no tolerance for any of that stuff. I mean, I was a hardliner. I believe people who use drugs in any way, shape, or form, I literally believe that they were criminals. I believe that they should have been in jail. I believe that anybody related to those people were the same thing. So you could imagine what was running through my mind, right? And then, by the way, at that point, I was a fine-tuned athlete. I mean, I went to college on a football scholarship. I was working out hard. And if anything was even a threat of getting in the way of that, I wanted nothing to do with it. So I looked at him, and I was just about ready to say, go to hell, James. Screw you, James. I was just about ready to reject him when I looked into his face and I saw something that I had never, ever seen before. The first thing that I saw was absolute, utter fear. Fear unlike I had ever seen it. I saw guilt to the point where I thought he was ready to literally break down. I saw despair unlike I had ever seen it. And I saw 2 other things in him. I saw this crying out for forgiveness, and I saw somebody who was just begging to be loved. Now, why I understood that when I was 20 years old and why I was chosen to be there in that moment, I don't know. But I'm glad that I was. So he handed the joint to me, and I took it. And I sat there and I smoked it with him. And over the next hour, he told me some unbelievable things. The first thing he told me was what it was like to be in hand-to-hand combat with somebody and kill them with your bare hands. That's the first thing he told me. And he told me how devastating that was to him, personally, spiritually, every single way that you can think of. The next thing he told me was how fearful he was that he was going to die when he was going out on patrol, and that there were times that he wished literally that he would die so he wouldn't have to experience the fear. And the third thing that he told me was how personally devastated he was when he came back to the United States and he was rejected by his friends and family.